Global Dairy Market. This video is a project of Dairy Australia. It is one of 5 videos produced as part of the Milk Value Education series. This project received funding from the Australian Government. This video will provide some of the key facts relating to global dairy markets. It will also inform you about what these global markets mean for the Australian dairy industry. This information will equip you to maximise profitability, assess risk, and put some context around key events in the global dairy industry. There are many factors influencing the global dairy markets. Let's take a closer look. Total annual global dairy production is 860 billion litres. This comes from cow's milk, which makes up 700 billion litres, and milk from other species making up 160 billion litres. This chart shows the biggest dairy producers in the world. India is the largest, followed by the European Union. Then there is the US, Pakistan, Brazil, China, Russia, Turkey, and our New Zealand neighbours. Australia is relatively small in the scheme of things, producing 8 billion litres annually. So who is consuming all this dairy? As the world population increases and the standard of living improves, dairy consumption around the globe continues to increase by about 2% per annum. There are 2 ways to consume dairy, the first being fresh drinking milk and fresh milk products such as cream. In some countries, this consumption is limited due to supply chain issues associated with the costs of keeping the products fresh. The second type is in the form of manufactured dairy products. These products include cheese, butter, and powders, skim and whole milk. Because milk is 85% water, it is expensive to transport and refrigerate. Therefore, it's more cost-effective to manufacture dairy products that can be easily stored and transported to market, both domestically and internationally. The largest consumers of dairy by volume are India, the EU, USA, China and Brazil, and emerging countries from Southeast Asia. Australian consumption is relatively small, at around 2 million metric tonnes. As we have seen, India and China are both large producers and consumers of dairy. China's dairy industry doesn't produce enough dairy for their own consumption, so China is a net importer. India is the largest dairy producer and consumer in the world. They have a very balanced dairy trade, as they produce and consume similar volumes. New Zealand, on the other hand, export 90% of what they produce. New Zealand, the EU, USA and Australia produce more milk than they can consume and therefore export the surplus milk in manufactured form for the best market returns on the global dairy market. Of all the 700 billion litres of milk produced, only 8 to 10% is traded annually, making this a thinly traded market. So, what are the key drivers of the global market? Like with all markets, prices are ultimately determined by supply and demand. Let's look at both of these in more detail. What are the factors influencing demand? Demand for dairy is growing at a relatively steady 2% per year and is considered inelastic, meaning that it remains relatively constant despite changes in price. Global supply is different. It is elastic, which means it will change depending on certain factors and may then influence price. Seasonal conditions can affect the dairy volumes produced. Favourable seasonal conditions will see global supply increase, whereas unfavourable conditions, such as drought, will see production lower, decreasing the supply of milk to the world market. Market signals are another factor affecting supply. Favourable prices will see producers increase production, whereas lower prices result in a negative supply response. Geopolitics with respect to trade barriers and free trade, sustainability compliance, wars or conflicts can have positive and negative impacts on the supply produced. What about the Australian dairy industry? We know that Australia produces approximately 8.2 billion litres of milk nationally. This is produced from the key dairy regions of Australia. Let's take a closer look. Queensland and the northern parts of New South Wales produce around 6% of Australia's total production. South Australia makes up 5%. Tasmania produces 10% of the nation's total. Victoria, the Riverina and southern New South Wales produce around 64% of Australia's production. while Western Australia produces around 4% of national production. Australians are some of the highest consumers of dairy per person in the world, and while we consume a large proportion of what we produce, as we know, there is some surplus, which is destined for the world market. Of the 8.2 billion litres produced in Australia, 2.5 billion, or about 30%, goes into fresh drinking milk. The remainder goes into manufactured goods such as butter, cheese, skim and whole milk powder. Australia has always been a great trading nation, and our liberalised trade policies mean we operate in a system where there are few trade barriers. So for the dairy industry, this means as well as Australia being able to export dairy products out of Australia, we can also import dairy products. Buyers of dairy, such as retailers, supermarkets and food manufacturers, can choose to import overseas-made dairy products. So Australian-produced dairy products are competing with imported dairy products, resulting in our industry being linked to the global market. For example, the Australian-New Zealand Closer Economics Relations trade policy allows New Zealand dairy products to be imported to Australia, giving them direct access to our domestic markets. Australian retailers, food manufacturers and food service business import dairy products such as butter, cheese and ice cream from the global market, as it may offer better value for money. On the other hand, Australian manufacturers of cheese may choose to export to countries such as Japan, as their market may offer greater than our local markets. Now that we know more about the global dairy market, what can we do with this information? Well, we can look at some of the resources available, stay informed by looking out for regular updates on changes to the global dairy market, and think about the implications to your business. To learn more about the global dairy market, be sure to check out the Dairy Australia website, talk to your local RDP, and log on to the Milk Value Portal website. And don't forget to watch the other videos in the Milk Value Education series to learn more about the value of your milk.